is, I'm not going through the main subroutine thing, because it's just introducing some overhead that I don't want to focus on at this point. So we'll just kind of go back to the old way of doing things and say print invoke 5. Okay, which is something that we haven't seen before. And this program is pretty much as simple as it gets when it comes to using return value as an example. Okay, so we'll go ahead and trace this program. And find out what it does. Before we do that, let's save it. Simple return value. We don't need comments because there are no conditional statements, no loops here. We do need line number. Do I have any global variables?
No.
Nope, no global variables. Do I have any parameters? No parameters. Okay, so this one is like the bare minimum, to illustrate the concept of returning a value. The first line I execute is line 5, the only line that is outside of a subroutine. But this time, we don't specify return line number anymore. Okay? We don't use return line number to label this column anymore. What we do is we label this column as return information. Okay? And I will show you why we have return information instead of return line number. Okay, let's say let me illustrate the problem of return line number. What am I going to say about the return line number? Well, let's forget that. Let's just look at line 5 here. What do you think line 5 has to do? How many things does it have to do?
It has to print and receive information and print.
Okay, now does it print first, or does it find out what the invocation is going to return?
The invocation.
I have to first do the invocation, right? But after the invocation, I have to print the value out. So it has 2 steps to it, right? Now, when you have 2 steps to perform on line 5, and we have to specify a single line number to return to, what are you going to specify? Do you specify line 5 again? Now, if you specify line 5 again, then the question is, do we restart the whole thing? No, we're not going to restart the whole thing. We will just continue and go ahead with the print. But how do you say that we'll just go ahead and continue with the print instead of invoking 5 again? In other words, just specifying a line number is no longer sufficient of specifying the behavior of the program. So what we do is we don't specify the return line number, and I just specify as return information. The return information is going to look like this. Now, this is going to be kind of strange to look. I will specify the return information is to go back to line 5. But not only saying that we are returning to line 5, I even spell out line 5 has a print statement. But I don't specify the invoke anymore. I replace the invocation that triggers this execution by a single question mark. Are we doing okay so far? Let me just explain that again. Okay, let me explain what we are doing here. Okay, we are executing line 5. Okay, let me just change the... Okay, we're executing line 5. We're executing line 5 because line 5 has invoke 5 in it. Right? Because we need to figure out what invoke 5 is going to return to me in order to continue with the print of that same line. So instead of using return line number to tell me where to go back to, I use return info, not only to tell me which line I'm going back to, but how do I continue on that line. That is the reason why we spell out the line number as well as the rest of the line that I have to perform. The reason why the invoke itself is replaced by a single question mark is because that's exactly what we are trying to figure out by invoking 5. The question mark marks the spot that we are going to figure out during the invocation of the subroutine 5. Question?
Well, it's not a question. When you're running a little program within a program in line 5 with math by doing what's in the parentheses first.
Yes. We're doing the operation specified inside the parentheses first.
And then when
that is
your
done,
return statement says go back to where your line were because you're not finished, which is the print statement, and then you're passing the value back of what to print.
Yep. So the return statement is doing this. Okay. Does everybody kind of have an idea of what we are doing here with the highlighted cells? Okay. Yep.
So the return info is going to happen first, and then the print is going to happen second.
Correct. So let me just kind of write down here what we are doing here. Okay. Cell. This is B3. Remembers not only where to go back to, or which line, which line to go back to, but also which part of that line is left to execute. Okay? And then the question mark is a placeholder. Okay? Now when we execute subroutine 5, there's only one line that does anything useful, and it is line 2. The big question is, what does line 2 do? When you see a return statement, what you do is you copy the return info and paste it. And then you replace the question mark with whatever value that we are returning. Okay? So let me just write down here. I'm pretty sure it's in the notes too, but I'm just going to write it down because it's right next to the trace itself. In a return statement, copy and paste the return info cell. Then replace the question mark with the value specified by the return statement. Yep.
Why do we do print 5 when line 2 all it does is return a number, and 5, the line 5 is actually the one that prints it?
Well, this is not executing the print statement. This is only saying that, oh, by now we know what we're going to print when we get to line 5. But we are not on line 5 yet, are we?
No.
Exactly. So we have resolved what it is supposed to do, but we're not doing it yet. Okay? We basically fill that placeholder that previously was unknown. But we're not there to execute that statement yet, because we are now on line 2.
In some respects, we're returning to the segment inside line 5.
We continue with that line. Yep.
Finish line 5.
If it has additional invocations, then we have to resolve those invocations as well. But in this case, we have a single invocation that we are all done.
Prior to this, we've never returned to an inline function.
Yep. So after line 2, where do we go? Well, naturally, we go to line 3. And line 3 is always still doing the same thing. We go to line 3 and say where we are supposed to go to. We're supposed to go back to line 5. Okay, so we just say we're going back to line 5. And then we say, this is all deallocated. Now, the big question is, when we do get back to line 5, what does line 5 look like at this point? Line 5 is no longer like this. Line 5 is now like this. In other words, we know exactly what value to print now. It is the value of 5. So I guess after all, we do need one extra column to indicate that. Line 5 actually prints the value of 5, and when we are done with that, we are done. Confusing? Yeah. It is. Now it looks kind of convoluted. I mean, why do we want to do something like that? Let's look at another example. Okay, so we'll use more examples to illustrate this. And this time we'll have define sub 5 again, which doesn't do anything except to return the value of 5. And define sub. And once again, we'll use a print statement in the main program. But this time we'll say print invoke 5 plus invoke 5. Okay? Now, most of you, knowing what the previous program did, should all kind of recognize that this program will just print a value of 10, right? 5 plus 5 is 10. But the question is, when we are tracing it, how do we keep track of, okay, I know I'm in subroutine 5 this time, but where's the question mark? Okay, which question mark or which part of the print statement am I replacing with a value of 5? Yep. Mm-hmm.
Would you have an extra set of quote or parentheses in there?
Why?
To cover
the whole thing?
Yeah.
Nah, it doesn't need it. The parentheses are only there.
That's what my mind sees.
Okay. Well, you can add the additional one, but I don't really need the additional ones. Yep.
Which invoke 5 executes first?
Most of the time, it's left to right. In other words, your C program executes in the same order that people read in English. So it's left to right, top to bottom. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at that one, the new program. We'll call this one simple 2x return value, because it has 2 subroutine calls on the same line, which is something that we haven't seen before. How do we call 2 subroutines and on the same line? Well, now we can. And this really paves the road to, much more concise programs, later on. Okay. So let's go ahead and trace it. We need 1 column for comments at the print statement. For the most part, we don't need it right away, so I'm just going to scroll it off the screen so we don't need to see it. We start with line number. There are no global variables, and we start execution on line 5. Okay, line 5 is almost the same thing as last time. We know that we need return info because the invocation itself is not all by itself on the line. It is inside some kind of context. Okay, is that okay so far? Now, how do I know that I need to invoke something? Well, I know that I need to invoke something because I don't know what I'm supposed to print unless I know the result of this invoke 5 as well as the result of the other invoke 5. Is that making any sense? Okay. But what should I write here? I know the return info should tell me which line I'm supposed to go back to, and it's also supposed to tell me what else on that line is not done yet. The print part is definitely not done because I'm only taking care of one of the invokes. Now, which invoke am I taking care of first? It is usually done in a left to right manner. So this is the one that I'm dealing with, and that one is the only one that I replace with a question mark. The other one, for the most part, is not even, on my radar. So I'll just keep telling myself, I'll keep reminding myself that I have one other invoke statement, but I'm not dealing with it this time. Are we doing okay so far? Because I can only invoke one subroutine at a time. Either I deal with the left-hand side or I deal with the right-hand side. The natural order of most compilers is to go from left to right, and as a result, I take care of the left invoke 5 first. Are we doing okay so far? The question mark is serving the same purpose as the last one. It is basically saying, when this invocation of 5 returns a value, what am I specifying in the original operation? It's a placeholder that I will fill in later on.